So, welcome back. I want to thank you for your support. Thank you for your willingness to tune in. And this week, I'm releasing a lecture on a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. Now, as you can see how I'm recording behind me, you see some horror movie posters. You see Candyman, you see It. And what I drew from the inspiration for creating this lecture, which is essentially a part two to the lecture I released last week dealing with Psycho Killer. We know that there's a great fascination with serial killers. Our country, our society, people are just fascinated by serial killers. But then I thought, since I lecture on homicide, and my approach to lecturing on homicide is to talk about homicide in a total, in its totality. In other words, I can spend an entire semester just kind of focusing on homicide, maybe what it is in a general term, certainly looking at serial killers, maybe taking some cases, some infamous cases. Or why don't I have fun with the topics and with the titles, and why don't I incorporate some different elements of pop culture in the lecture? So hence, this topic, Halloween Kills, was birthed out of my love, my desire, and my passion for horror movies. Now, if you're new to the channel, please be sure to check out some of my other videos. Watch the videos in its totality. What I'm doing here as a professor and in launching CJC, Criminal Justice College, I want this to be a channel and an opportunity where you can come in and say, I'm fascinated, Professor Fields, by criminal justice. Wow, you have a background in law enforcement, a background in probation, a background in the courts, and you're a professor teaching on some of the coolest and most unbelievable topics out there. Yeah, I want to tune in. And I hope that as you look at these videos and as you look at these lectures, you'll like what you see, you'll comment, and of course you'll want to share and subscribe. So thank you so much for your support. Again, be sure to like and subscribe. And as always, watch these lectures, ask questions, hit me up in my email address, which is listed on my channel page, as well as put some comments in there, and I would love to interact with you. So let's get into it. This topic is known as Halloween Kills. So let's start. So the outline for this lecture, this very unique lecture, which is really a love song to my favorite genre of movies. Yes, I love action. I love superhero movies. I'm wearing a Marvel shirt. But horror movies are something that I grew up with. My mom, my dad, really more or less my father, just to get a little personal and candid, he loved horror films. And I felt like that's why it was fitting for me to record today, with the backdrop being the posters of It and Candyman. So this lecture, we're going to look at and review fictional horror movie killers. We want to talk about what were some of their real life inspirations behind their murders and the direct ties within the criminal justice system. And then lastly, we do want to talk about mental health and criminal justice as a whole and why this discipline is often overlooked. This is a perfect correlation and summation that I'm going to delve into. And like I did with my in-person students, I'm going to delve into that as it relates to some of these horror movie killers. So, first up, this lovely, lovely guy, Leatherface. Now, I thought I would do something different, and I figured I want this to be a fun lecture. I don't want anyone to tune in and say, he seems entertaining, and I love his energy, but can we get a little bit more? And I figured this is the perfect lecture to unveil, and certainly if it was in Halloween, obviously right now, it is April at the time of this lecture. But if this was around Halloween, I would probably go all out. But with my love of horror films, I have the two right here. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the beginning, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, of course, the remake that came out around 2004 or 5 or so. But this is Leatherface. And Leatherface, he is a character from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series. The series started in 1974. I remember being a kid watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, probably sometime, in the 90s, give or take. But I remember watching it and thinking, man, this is because they dub it as a movie that is either inspired or based on true events. And it scared the Jesus out of me. And talking to Dad, he was like, "Yeah, that really happened. That's why you don't go to Texas." But I now know that to not be true. So Leatherface, he wields a chainsaw to dismember his victims, and he is the most notable mentally disabled member of his family of deranged cannibals. The family that Leatherface is a part of, they are cannibals. So whereas the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, I'm not really that big of a fan of as a horror movie buff. But the earlier ones, yes, cannibalism played a key role, not to be too graphic. And yes, they were taking meat and smoking meat. Now, Leatherface is derived from the fact that he would cut off the faces of the victims and wear their skin. That's why he called himself Leatherface. And in terms of the number of victims over the course of the franchise, he, pretty much offed at least 63 people. So what was the inspiration behind Leatherface? Because what's so unique, and that's why I had so much fun, it was so amazing how in preparation for this lecture, I thought to myself, you know what, I really want to draw a correlation between the fictional character and a potential real life counterpart. And, you're not always going to have that with some of these horror movie serial killers and psychopaths, but generally speaking, there may be one. And so with that being said, Ed Gein was the real Leatherface. So when I did the Psycho Killer lecture, this is, again, it's essentially a follow-up. This is almost like a part 2 to that lecture. So it works out perfectly that they were in back-to-back weeks. I talked about how Ed Gein was a psychotic subtype serial killer. And what that means is, as a psychotic subtype serial killer, Ed Gein, he had mental illness. Once his mental illness was treated, he was a model citizen. He could not stand trial for his charges because he didn't know any better. He wasn't of a reasonably sane mind. So Gein was known as the Butcher of Plainfield, and again, he was the biggest influence and inspiration behind the creation of Leatherface and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yes, Gein did not use chainsaws, so we didn't have a man running around Plainfield with a chainsaw hacking and slicing and dicing people up. He didn't do that, but he did make masks out of human skin. So again, it's this right here, and I love this cover right here because you can see the little texture. This is Leatherface, and this is essentially what Leatherface, why he got that name. His face was either deformed or something happened and you didn't want to see his face, but he would wear people's skin. And so after Gein's mother passed away, he turned the family farmhouse into a shrine for her. Ed really loved his mother. When I was doing research on Ed Gein and looking more into him, he really loved his mother. As a matter of fact, one of the clips that I saw is that Ed and his brother, they were out in a field and the brother mysteriously died. Many people feel that Ed killed his brother because he wanted to have his mother all to himself. But with that being said, he ends up indulging in these macabre fantasies. He starts robbing graves, and he doesn't rob them just for the possessions. He robs them to steal body parts to decorate his home. Could you imagine in this theater room, you come in and you're like, well, Professor Fields, that's a nice lamp you have right here, but why is that lamp somebody's leg? I mean, it was insane what Gein did. And so 2 women fell victim to his sadistic efforts, Bernice Warden and Mary Hogan. But again, he was ruled criminally insane. And once he got on his medications, which I will talk about in end lecture discussing mental illness, he was fine. And of course, yes, when police did search the residence, they found so many body parts of so many women, they couldn't tell who was who and where did these body parts come from. It's a horrible thing to notice and have your loved one's grave desecrated where this psychotic individual steals their body parts and he's using it as decorations, hanging it on the walls and using it for lamps and taking, their faces and wearing them as masks. So that's Ed Gein, the inspiration behind Leatherface. Here's the next one, Ghostface. Now listen, I did not have a Ghostface mask. I wish I did. This is kind of like we'll call him Ghoulface, okay? It's no copyright infringement here. We'll call him Ghoulface. And it's funny because I should have probably brought this into my students and got a real nice laugh in class. So maybe in a future semester I'll do that. But no, I don't have Ghostface. I got Ghoulface. So we got Ghoulface, but we're going to talk about Ghostface. So Ghostface, he is, or she, depending on if you're the Scream fan, but we'll leave that one there. They are from the Scream franchise, and Ghostface's weapon of choice is the Buck 120 knife. Ghostface is so quick. I mean, when he's stabbing or when they're stabbing, it's like, I wish I had a Buck 120 knife just to demonstrate, but they stab with such precision. They carve with such force and velocity, and they will slice throats, gut victims, and they'll even primarily kill based on the fascination of horror and scary movies. In fact, who hasn't seen Scream and who has not repeated the most infamous line? Hello, Sydney. What's your scary movie? That is a franchise that will, be in existence for another 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And people will always go back to when the franchise debuted in 1996 with those iconic words. What's your scary movie? And so there's at least been 13 psychopaths who've donned the suit and mask. And the resulting Ghostface persona remains the same. It's usually a black hood and cloak with a jagged base, white rubber mask resembling a ghost, and the ghost is typically screaming or yelling. And it gives the wearer an extreme durability against harm. They have high levels of physical strength. I have seen in Scream movies where women who are like, 5'6", maybe like 110 pounds, or 5'3", 110 pounds, they have superhuman strength. It's uncanny, and almost supernatural stealth abilities. If you out there have ever seen a Scream, I would certainly love for you to comment or like or hit me up. But generally speaking, in Screams, Ghostface moves with such durability, such stealth, such nimbleness that you just can't hit Ghostface. You can't really attack Ghostface. You almost have to catch Ghostface by surprise, and that's hard to do. So all in all, throughout the franchise, it's estimated that Ghostface has probably killed about 40 people. Again, hits the criteria and meets the definition of a psychopath and a potential serial killer. Well, we have a man by the name of Danny Rawling. Danny Rawling was the Gainesville Ripper. And what people don't know is that Scream was based on this real-life serial killer. Like I said, the other week, I talked about serial killer subtypes. I talked about how serial killers are angry and how they might be visionary and psychotic, like Ed Gein. And some may even be ideological. But Danny Rawling, he kind of had a couple of subtypes. He had some sexually based, and he also, going quite frankly, I think had a little bit of a power controlling subtype because he just felt that he could kill just because. And so he was known as the Gainesville Ripper, and who was a real life serial rapist and murderer. And this was the inspiration behind Kevin Williamson to create Ghostface. So remember, Wes Craven directed and created Scream, but Kevin Williamson was the screenwriter. And Kevin Williamson gave us, an iconic horror movie franchise that is still operational this day. Again, there will be a new Ghostface and a new Scream movie coming out within the next year or so. But it all started with this guy, Danny Rawling, who was known as the Gainesville Ripper. So from 1989 to 1990, let me tell you something. Let me pause right here. The 1980s, the 1980s was a very turbulent time. I'm telling you, It was so turbulent. You had kidnappings, you had new diseases that were affecting certain people and populations, you had serial killers. I mean, the 80s and into the 90s were about as wild and as turbulent as it comes. Like, I am going to have to one day sit down with my mom or some other older family members and say, just talk to me about the 80s and 90s, because how did you make it? You know, so with that being said, from 1989 until 1990, Gainesville, Florida residents, they grappled with their own fears because Rawling ended up murdering or taking out rather 8 people, including 4 students from the University of Florida. Now, another student was from Santa Fe Community College. He would go on to spy on women in their homes, and this was a key inspiration behind Ghostface, because if any of you have ever seen a Scream movie, Ghostface is in the shadows, he's talking to you on the phone, you're talking to him. You know, people are just like, I guess people are so trusting that they just want to talk to this guy, and yet turns out that he already has calculated your moves. He already knows where you're at, he knows the door locks, he's already probably in the house, and that's Ghostface. And so Danny Rawling had that same level of menacing stealth in that he would hide, or he would be spying on people and they wouldn't even know what hit them until it was too late. So what's very interesting about the Danny Rawling case is that when we're talking about scary movies here, he claimed in his defense that he didn't know the difference between movies and reality. In other words, Danny Rawling was living in a kind of a simulation, you know? He didn't know what was real, what was fake, what was blurred, and he argued that his motivation to go kill was driven after he watched The Exorcist. That's why, he has some power controlling, and some sexually based, but he absolutely also has some visionary as well, because he sees The Exorcist 3, and now he's commanded to go kill. So this is the graffiti wall that is in Gainesville, and I should tell you all that listen, like I'm from Gainesville. I went to the University of Florida. I graduated from the University of Florida, having worked in law enforcement. The picture of these victims, Sonia Larson, Christina Powell, Krista Hoyt, Tracy Pauls, and Manuel Taboda, their pictures were always hanging up in the halls of the sheriff's office. You never have any foresight on, I may not be in this career in 5 years or 10 years or however long, but it's something I wish I did take a picture of, just as a kind of a reminder of, number one, it commemorates their memory, but 2, it's why you're in law enforcement. You're there to catch these people that may do some of the most heinous crimes. But yeah, if any of my viewers or listeners or subscribers ever end up going to Gainesville, go on 34th Street. It's not far from the University of Florida campus, and you will see this wall is never touched. And the one time someone did vandalize it, almost a third of the community, it felt like, came together to restore the wall. This is a part of Gainesville history that it happened in 1990. We literally, going on almost 35 or so years later, this monument or this wall will commemorate those victims and their families, even though this happened nearly 35 years ago. And of course, that's the monster. I wanted you all to see who he was, and the key word is was, because he is no longer alive. But this is the monster, a guy who looked somewhat unassuming. You look at him, what does he look like? What does he say what does this picture speak to you? Obviously, if I didn't tell you he was on trial, maybe a businessman, maybe a sleazy car salesman. But Danny Rawling was a murderer. He was the Gainesville Ripper. He is one of those serial killers that has caused Gainesville some level of infamy, besides their football team and besides the university. But he is a part of Gainesville lore. The Gainesville Ripper, Danny Rawling. So I just wanted to put that in there as well. And last but not least, now, I gotta whip out the Jason mask. And yes, you're gonna say, well, that's not Jason. No. But if there's anybody that has an iconic horror movie mask, not Leatherface, not Ghostface, although some would argue. So I'm going to say this guy right here, Michael Myers. I always am a big fan of Jason. I can watch Friday the 13th today as if I never saw it before. And I can run through all the Friday the 13th movies and not get tired of it. So this guy is Michael Myers, and, he attacks on, you guessed it, my last prop, Halloween. That's right, Michael Myers, that is his holiday, Halloween. And so, Michael Myers was categorized as pure evil. And what he would primarily do, he had a lot of different ways he would, take someone out. But the chef's butcher knife was what he primarily used. And that goes all the way back to Halloween that came out in 1978. So the main signature for Michael Myers is that he will strike on Halloween, hence the movie. And as a 6-year-old boy, he murdered and, took out his teenage sister for no reason on Halloween night in 1963. 15 years later, he's now 21. He escapes from a mental hospital and he's back to terrorize the residents. Now, depending on the canon or franchise arc that you follow, he's really after Laurie Strode, who is his sister. She's kin to him. But like I said, depending on what arc you follow, that may not be as clear and as defined. So Michael Myers, he's amassed about 159 murders throughout the franchise. That's a very high number. Of course, as I said before, this guy right here, Jason, has more murders, but Michael Myers, he's definitely up there compared to Ghostface and compared to Leatherface. And so with respect to him being pure evil, the reason why he was often called that is because he's virtually unstoppable. You shoot him 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, he keeps coming. You beat him and bludgeon him and you beat him, he keeps getting up. You stab him, he gets up. He's burning in a fire, he gets up. Like, he is pure evil. It's almost like The Mask, and it's almost like Halloween infuses so much pure evil, like almost demonic evil, that he's unstoppable. Like, literally, you would probably be better off just chaining him up and, throwing him in an ocean or something, or putting him in some type of cage where he's under, 24/7 observation. He's chained up. But either way, he is pure evil. So Michael Myers escaping from the Mental Health Institute is a perfect segue to this next part of the lecture, which will also be how we'll kind of wrap things up. And that's, we need to understand diagnosis. Now, criminologists do not engage in formal diagnosis of an offender. A person that decides to be a criminologist historically, and I consider myself a criminologist at heart, historically, they are focusing on crime, what causes crime, why do people commit crime, and essentially they're looking at the why as the reason that it happened, right? A criminologist typically will also focus on theory, and I love theory. But when we were talking about serial killers last week, I did share with you all that it's a term coined by the FBI and it's not a clinical definition. In other words, the FBI are one of the most well-known and noteworthy law enforcement agencies, not only in the country but in the world. The FBI designated a serial killer as a person who kills 2 or more victims and 2 or more separate events, usually with a cooling off period. So because we know the definition of a serial killer is not a clinical definition, what we have to understand is that criminologists do not engage in formal diagnoses of offenders. In other words, criminologists, the FBI, they stay in their lane, and psychologists and therapists will stay in their lane. So it is very important for criminologists to understand that psychological disorders are most closely linked to criminality, but they cannot diagnose. They can't look at a person and say, yeah, I definitely think you are bipolar. Oh man, you're acting like a paranoid schizophrenic. You don't have the qualifications as a criminologist or someone that's a specialist in law enforcement or any other criminal justice agency to make that designation. But you know who does? The therapists, the psychologists, and those who work in mental health. So what they will typically do is that they want to gain a psychological understanding, so to speak, of different disorders, so that way they can do the following. One, construct an accurate profile of the perpetrator. You want to catch these people, right? If somebody is a little bit psychotic or very dangerous, you want that person off the streets so they don't strike next. You want to identify the individual. Well, who are we looking for? We're just looking for a tall, 6'5", white man. Okay, well, there's a lot of tall 6'5" white men. Can you give us a little bit more to go on? So that way we can potentially identify who that individual is and give what's called a bolo, be on the lookout, so that way people won't encounter that person because they may be dangerous. Of course, capturing the suspect peacefully is very controversial. Part of the reason why it's controversial is because oftentimes criminals and suspects don't want to go quietly. In fact, most of the time they go kicking and screaming. So if you can get them peacefully, wonderful. If you can't, and sometimes you can't. And so lastly, you want to question them successfully. In other words, you want to ask them the hard questions, just like in the clip that I played, or would have played, rather. I played it in my class. I apologize. There are people, psychologists and profilers, who meet with many of these, some of these most notorious offenders, and they try to get into their mind. Why did they do what they did? Why were they, feeling that they had the ability and the propensity to kill? And so that's why you want to question them successfully, so that way you can accurately point out that if you're seeing these warning signs, maybe, just maybe, some intervention is needed. So that's one of the reasons why you will oftentimes question him. So that way it helps you get into the mind of someone who may be experiencing some of the same symptoms, and that way there could be intervention before they do go on a spree. So let's talk about schizophrenia, diagnoses that, many would argue that maybe Michael Myers or Leatherface or some of these other offenders maybe suffer from. So schizophrenia is a progressive disease. It typically begins in young adulthood. It's classified as a psychotic disorder that is identified by a breakdown in thought, emotion, and behavior. Now, it is lifelong. In other words, once you're diagnosed with schizophrenia, you will always have schizophrenia. It's not curable, but it is treatable, and treatment is a great thing. A person suffering from mental illness, class, should get treatment to deal with those mental health issues, so that way they could be the best version of themselves. That's all anybody typically wants. But unfortunately, when the mental illness takes over their mind, they don't realize that they need help. In fact, they may be very paranoid, or they may be judgmental to the fact that someone is telling them that they have a problem, when it's not even telling them they have a problem. It's just saying, we want you to get help so you could be the best version of yourself while you cope with this mental illness that is not curable, but it is treatable. And so it is a serious life-altering illness. It renders many patients unable to care for themselves. And when people suffering from schizophrenia get to the point where their emotions, thoughts, and behaviors have significantly broken down to the point where it's almost diminished, then generally speaking, that patient may have to live in a facility or undertake long-term care in order to be successful, to have a remaining good, successful life, so to speak, or comfortable life before the disease fully takes over them. So the disorders include faulty perceptions, inappropriate actions or feelings, and a break from reality as exhibited by the hallucinations and delusions. So when looking at schizophrenia, there's two noteworthy categories. There's positive symptoms that are shown, and there's negative symptoms. Let me go ahead and try to explain the positive symptoms first. First of all, delusion. I like to joke with my students, and I like to say, if you never showed up to class, which I sometimes get that, if you don't make a concerted effort to try to at least be here from time to time, I love the students that are always here and have perfect attendance, because truth be told, those are the students that really are getting something out the class. Folks are paying lots of money to go to some of these major colleges and universities. While I'm doing this video for free, and people are able to see this and hopefully jot down some notes and ask questions and say, yeah, I want to see more from him. It blows my mind when a student never shows up and has this fervent belief that they're going to pass the class with an A minus, A plus. It's delusional. It's delusional. Beliefs that are maintained despite strong evidence to the contrary. If I have your grades and I see you've not been here, you've not been here, you've not been here, and you're telling me, oh, Professor Fields, I'm going to blow it out the park and I'm going to get myself an A on the test, I'm like, okay, good luck. But deep down, probably very delusional. Let's talk about hallucinations, sensory experiences that others do not share, like hearing voices, seeing things. If I'm looking like, what's that over there? Now, you can't see my screen, or if you're like, yo, you got something in your background, like you need to replay this video, we don't see anything that's there. Most people will be like, there's nothing there. Probably a person could be hallucinating, could be a sign or positive symptom of mental illness, and particularly schizophrenia. And then lastly, disorganized speech. Frequent derailment, can't stay on topic, a lot of words sound incoherent. It's very easy in my profession to talk and talk and talk and talk. And in this forum, until I figure out if I want to have things be a little bit more interactive, it's just me talking. It's me and the camera for 30, 40, 50 minutes. But what I thrive on when I'm a professor in class is the interaction, But if I was talking and all of a sudden I wasn't making any sense, I would hope that somebody in the classroom would say, we need to check on Professor Fields, because if he's not making sense, maybe he's suffering from a stroke or something's happening medically. Well, in this case with schizophrenic patients who have positive symptoms, their speech is already disorganized. They can't stay on topic. They can't kind of remain coherent, so to speak. And then, of course, the last one are the negative symptoms. First of all, the catatonic behavior. If you're rocking back and forward, and whatnot. Like if you see on some movies when they have somebody walking through a mental health hospital or whatever, you'll get, individuals who, you'll get individuals who sometimes are, in some of these locations, and they're just sitting there and they're just rocking and pacing, and they're, that's catatonic behavior. That's behavior that is very alarming, and it's clearly a significant symptom of schizophrenia. It's a negative symptom. And a lot of why it's sometimes considered negative, to my understanding, is that, it's like that behavior needs to be managed so significantly because the person might be frozen. They may be immobile. They may be just staring off into space. That's catatonic behavior. The emotional flatness, is a lack of appropriate emotional responses or reactions. That's the idea and notion of feeling flat. I've been in the courtroom where the judge deemed a client flat. Some of my own clients, he was like, nope, you got to go in. You got to go under observation. But yeah, I've seen judges call people out on being emotionally flat. And then lastly, lack of motivation. Listen, we all may lack motivation. We might say, okay, I'm going to be motivated to work out, 4 times a week, and you don't work out. You may say, I may be motivated to eventually run a couple of miles, and you don't go running. That lack of motivation is very real across the board. But when you look at the first two negative symptoms of schizophrenia, the catatonic behavior and emotional flatness, those two jump out. Because just having a basic drive response is a strong indicator that something is significantly wrong. But lack of motivation, a lot of us have that. A lot of us, we're not motivated. We don't feel like, I don't think this is gonna be good, or I might want to, table this. That lack of motivation is something that we all suffer from. It does not mean that you are schizophrenic. So this lecture, as we draw to a close, wanted to look at the 3 notable horror movie serial killers: Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Ghostface, Scream, and of course Michael Myers' Halloween. All those franchises and all those numbers of kills, including the weapons used and some of the motivations behind the murders. But yes, that was first. Then wanted to draw a correlation between the horror movie serial killer and two real life counterparts, because maybe you're out here and you're like, yeah, I know about Leatherface, but I didn't know Ed Gein was the inspiration behind that. And you might be like, yeah, I know about Ghostface. I love Scream, but what? Danny Rowan from the University of Florida was involved? Like, what is that correlation that exists between real life individuals and this monster serial killers that they will, that they're drawn from? What is that inspiration? And then lastly, understanding schizophrenia, particularly the positive and the negative symptoms. Remember those positive symptoms: being delusional, hallucinating, being incoherent, having word salad, not making sense. Whereas those negative symptoms are the ones that are very concerning because of the state of the person. They may just very well be just in a catatonic state where they're just pacing and no interaction with the world. They may be in that. And so looking at those negative symptoms and what those are, the emotional flatness, of course, and the lack of motivation being the other two. So with that being said, I definitely want to thank you. You see, we got Michael Myers, Leatherface, and Ghostface, and ending us with today's lecture. I just want to say, remember, it's only just a nightmare. That's it. It's a nightmare. If you're looking in the face of Michael Myers, if you're running from Leatherface in Texas, or if Ghostface is popping up, in your apartment or on your dorm or in your city, it's only just a nightmare. So listen, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Please be sure to look at the video, see what you like, maybe give some comments, give some feedback. I'm definitely open for that. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at my email address listed on my page. You can put a comment in. You can share with your friends, share with people who you might be like, hey, I think this guy's pretty interesting. But please be sure to share. And of course, if this is something that you think you're interested, I would always appreciate the subscription. So with that being said, take care, good night, and like I said, don't let Ghoulface scare you. No. Don't let Ghoulface scare you. Remember what I'm saying. It's nothing more than just a nightmare. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.